Hi. In this week, in the 7 Minutes in the Word, we've been talking about marriage, and we've looked at one verse so far, which is a verse that's repeated in the Bible that just talks about the idea of leaving, becoming united, and one flesh. And we've talked about some of the mistakes that we can make in marriage. We've talked about a failure to cut the cord, a failure to commit, and then a failure to connect deeply. But there's one more failure, and I find this again in Ephesians 5, but a few verses later, that is common in marriage, and that is a failure to cherish. Verse 33 of Ephesians 5 says, "However, each one of you also must love his wife, as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband." Now, this is part of a long flow of a passage, and it's just one verse. But part of what this verse is teaching us is that there's an important role in marriage, and that is to cherish your spouse. It says the husband's to love as he loves himself, and the wife is to respect. And the picture here, although there's different words used, is similar in the sense of it's saying to take the other person's needs, the other person's desires, the other person's values, and you assimilate them into your life in such a way that they feel completely valued. So how do you really cherish somebody, or what would a failure to cherish look like? To really cherish somebody means that you say their opinions matter. It means that you would say, "I appreciate you," and you would avoid devaluing activities. To fail to cherish somebody, what you would do is you would basically say, "Your opinions don't matter. You're not appreciated for the things that you do." And in a sense, you would do things that are fairly devaluing. I remember years ago, I was out to eat with my family, and there was a couple sitting next to us. And the husband and the wife were obviously at odds with one another. It was just kind of ugly to even be close. They were having catty conversations. They were giving each other hard looks. And then all of a sudden, the server came over to serve them. And when the server came over, all of a sudden, both of them put on this persona of happy person, and they were so kind, so gracious to the server. And then the server left their table, and as soon as the server left their table, they went right back into their head-to-head kind of conversation where you could just sense the tension. And I remember watching that and asking myself, have I treated people who serve me in restaurants better than I've treated my own wife at times? And the answer, sadly, is sometimes yes. And what the text here says is that a failure to cherish is a failure to really love or to really respect. And what that ultimately points to for you, for me, wherever you are in your marriage relationship, is that if you fail to really cherish your spouse, what you're doing is you're not loving yourself, because the text says to love as you love yourself, and to not love, you're hurting yourself because you're now one flesh. And so you're creating dissonance in your life and in your relationship. I'll never forget, years ago, I was out to eat with a man who had been my mentor. His name was Leighton Ford. He had worked with Billy Graham for years, and he had married Billy Graham's sister, and Jeannie was her name. And I was out with Leighton and Jeannie and several other young pastors who were being mentored by Leighton. And we had gotten to know Leighton well over the time that he had mentored us formally. And some of the guys were joking and picking on one of Leighton's idiosyncrasies. And I'll never forget, because there was a moment in the conversation where it was just kind of served up to Jeannie, like, "Here, do you want to jump on with this and take a shot at Leighton?" And I could kind of see that it was actually starting to irritate him a little. He was a very gracious man, still is, still alive, and he would have probably, in a sense, have just rolled with it. But all of a sudden in that moment, I saw Jeannie basically put her hand around Leighton and say, "I love Leighton just as he is." And what it was a moment of a couple that had been married for over 40 years saying, "I'll cherish you, and I won't let even friends in a good-natured way run you down, because I want you to be one who is ultimately cherished." And so the idea in this text is to say to love, to respect, to give of yourself. Now, that doesn't mean that you never challenge. In fact, in this passage, we see in verse 25 and 26 that the husband is called to make his wife holy by cleansing her with washing of the word. Verse 27, and to present her to himself as a radiant church without stain or wrinkle. And what that's talking about is not just simply saying, I cherish you, I'll never challenge you, because sometimes you will be called to challenge your spouse fully and completely. In fact, if you don't challenge your spouse, it's unlikely anybody else probably will have the same relationship, the same place, the same ability to challenge. And as a result, you may never have a better person to speak into your life than your spouse. But it means that you challenge them without, in a sense, causing the person to hurt, or without being damaging in the way that you do it, and you receive things from them without being defensive. Not to overquote the recent theologian Bruno Mars, but I know I talked about him yesterday from the Super Bowl, and he, in the Super Bowl, sang another song, or maybe it wasn't sung at the Super Bowl, but is in his canon of music. And the song is called When I Was Your Man. And he basically sings about this lady that he lost the love of because he wasn't wise enough to take her dancing and to hold her hand and to give her all his hours. But you know what Bruno Mars' song expresses? It expresses the heart longing of every person, and that is to be pursued and to be loved. And one of the things that you and I will regret in our marriages is if we fail to cherish the gift that God gives us. And so we'll regret a failure to cut the cord, a failure to commit, a failure to connect deeply, and a failure to cherish. And I've said this each day, but the way that you get the strength to do this isn't by merely saying, let me try harder to be a better husband, a better wife. Let me do these things. You can do that, and that'll help some. But it's by understanding the ultimacy of who Christ is. This little phrase in Ephesians 5 that says, I'm talking about a mystery. I'm talking about Christ in the church. It's when you understand that your relationship, your marriage relationship, is meant to be a taste. That's why at the end of the Bible, there's a wedding feast. In Revelation, there's this great wedding feast to be the consummation of all things, because the wedding is the way that God says, I'm going to choose to celebrate you being my bride. And so the home, the marriage, is a place where your relationship is given full expression, and it's a taste. And when it's not right, then you realize it and you feel it. And so my prayer for you is that your marriage will be a place where you sense and see God.